start things off, as Lauren said, we'll be hearing from Katie Koch. Katie is a migratory bird biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and she's based out of the service's Region 3 office in Marquette, Michigan, and she leads the Midwest Coordinated Bird Monitoring Partnership there. So with that, I will turn things over to Katie.
All right. I will pull up your PowerPoint. Just 1 second here.
And while you're doing that, I just wanted to take another opportunity to thank Ian and Lauren for inviting me to give this presentation today. And I'm also really looking forward to hearing the presentation to follow from Cara, Tim, and Matt. All right, very good. You should all be seeing my first slide. So I want to just note that there are several individuals who have contributed to these concepts in today's presentation, and they all serve with me on the steering committee for the Avian Knowledge Network. So I just wanted to pause and acknowledge them in this title slide. So with 25 minutes today, I've broken out this presentation into 3 main topics. And the first of those is really important background information on the Avian Knowledge Network, or as we like to call it, AKN 101. So the Avian Knowledge Network originated with the advent of the Internet, when some individuals sought to take advantage of the power of this new model to manage information that was being offered by the Internet. And the ideas for the Avian Knowledge Network really do go back to the late 90s. But it wasn't until we received an NSF grant in 2006 that we were able to develop the key components of the Avian Knowledge Network. And those included a common language that helped us to transfer data, and then the nodes, which were key to helping us aggregate and describe data. So we created the Bird Monitoring Data Exchange, and this is the schema that allows for us to accurately describe and maintain data sets in their entirety. So from very simple checklist data all the way up to banding data and very protocol-intensive data. We were able to follow the examples of museums by extending the data model that they use, which was Darwin Core. And in this first version of the Avian Knowledge Network, we centralized our monitoring data. And we also produced the founding nodes of the Avian Knowledge Network. And you can see those in orange on your screen. And those include the California Avian Data Center, the eBird model, and then Nature Counts, which is the AKN node in Canada, plus others that follow that you see in gray. And I'll show you some of those later on. And then what we learned early on was that this concept of data centralization came with some pros and cons. So what we found was that, first of all, our data sets are much more dynamic, and there's a much stronger sense of ownership than we would see in museum data. And what we found was that data providers were not in full control about how their data were used, and some concerns arose. And this early model didn't fully encourage data sharing. Some of the participants were questioning what they got back in return, and how does centralizing data help acknowledge the work they're doing and fund additional research. And we also found that the early model wasn't entirely helping with our mission and vision. And we really want conservation decisions to be made with the best data and resources available. But what we discovered from the early version of the Avian Knowledge Network is that the nodes proved to be very, very successful, and that did seem to be the right answer to this data issue. And so this is the homepage for the new Avian Knowledge Network website, and we call this version 2.0. And when you visit our website, and I was pleased to see that it's listed as another resource on the NWCC webpage, you'll find background information about the Avian Knowledge Network. You can go there to directly discover nodes and tools. You can access handouts and presentations, archived webinars, and then you can also post questions directly via our interactive help desk. Now, I need to make this distinction. At present, you cannot directly access or enter data from the AKN website. You have to go to an AKN node to do this, and I'll show you the nodes very soon here. I wanted to pause and just allow you to read through the vision of the Avian Knowledge Network. And there's a few very important components of our vision. One of those is a partnership. And certainly we're very focused and mission-oriented on enabling decisions that enhance conservation and management of birds throughout the annual cycle. And so what we have really in version 2.0 of the Avian Knowledge Network is the blending or intersection of science, people, data, and technology. And we have systems that help us capture, curate, analyze, and publish data, paying very careful attention to the data life cycle. It's through this new version of the Avian Knowledge Network that we're bringing together not only data, but knowledge, both about bird conservation issues and knowledge about data and decisions to be made, and a whole lot of expertise. And what we're offering are decision support systems that really enable learning and adaptive management. So this concept of a node of the Avian Knowledge Network is very attentive to this other concept of the data life cycle. And in fact, it's built right around it. So we have systems that help us capture the data in real time or historical data, to maintain and describe those data over time, to analyze, digest, understand what we're learning from the data, and deliver this information in ways that users are asking for. This is another way to look at the data life cycle. And what you'll see here is that we set up these nodes to really facilitate a learning process, as you see here. For some projects, and in many cases, this can be identical to adaptive management. But our vision of data-intensive science is more than just adaptive management. Our goal is really to develop an understanding of the system we're managing and conserving through hypothesis testing and based on the data. So quickly, I want to just show you a tour of the existing nodes of the Avian Knowledge Network. And this first node is the California Avian Data Center. And as you recall, this was one of the original AKN nodes. And since then, it has been cloned to provide support to several other regional and thematic nodes. Avian Knowledge Northwest covers the Pacific Northwest region of the country, primarily Oregon and Washington. The Midwest Avian Data Center is actually an outgrowth of the Midwest Coordinated Bird Monitoring Partnerships and covers the 8 states that you see in that small logo in the the upper left corner of this page. The Eastern Avian Data Center is our newest regional node of the Avian Knowledge Network, and it covers the northeastern and southeastern regions of the United States. The Rocky Mountain Avian Data Center, not surprisingly, covers that space between the Avian Knowledge Northwest and the Midwest Avian Data Center. And eBird is its own node of the Avian Knowledge Network, managing citizen science and a lot of birder observations throughout the entire globe. And then this last example I show you is what we call a thematic node. And so this is very focused on a project or a specific group of species or a specific question. And this is the Pacific Flyway Shorebird Survey node of the Avian Knowledge Network. And what's really impressive about this node is that it covers locations from Alaska to Argentina. And it serves up organizations and monitoring volunteers from 11 different countries and is even bilingual. In total, the Avian Knowledge Network has structured survey data from, at present, nearly 300,000 locations across the United States. And that represents nearly 130 million bird detections. And then we add to this 150 million or more eBird checklists. And I'm going to talk more about these data in the next section of today's talk. So we move very quickly through AKN 101, and I want to now transition into some of the science principles that are germane to all of the nodes and partnerships of the Avian Knowledge Network. So the first one is a commitment to quality, transparency, and repeatability. And all of the AKN databases are networked and visible through our different node tools. Most of them are managed with state-of-the-art online data management tools and applications, such as the one shown here. This was recently redesigned and launched in early 2014, and this new data management tool can handle hundreds of protocols ranging from point counts to playback surveys for secretive marsh birds to banding, area search, transect. We encompass quite a bit of variation here, and what's really fun about this is that the user interface is customized to the protocol that you're using. So, for example, I'm going to be entering data from my master's project in here in the fall, and the screen, the menu that I get for entering my project data will be very specific to the protocol that I select. So it's really advanced and really facilitates capture of all the important details that go in with a bird monitoring program. Another principle is that we really focus on a collaborative multi-partner approach. And one of the strengths of AKN data, not only because they're networked, is that they are consistently described across all data sets because we have that common schema, that bird monitoring data exchange. And this gives us the ability to then reach across projects and across protocols to appropriately aggregate data and develop advanced landscape level visualizations. And I've got two examples of this. The first example was developed for the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative. And this project aggregated data from 99 different projects that used 47 different survey protocols, and they were able to bring together about 1 million records that meet the minimum requirements for their advanced statistics. And what this tool produces is estimates of density that are linked to habitat variables and also corrected for imperfect detection. And these density estimates can then be readily verified through surveys using any one of the 47 protocols. This second example comes out of the Sonoran joint venture. And the Sonoran joint venture tool is a collaboration across country lines with data coming from many partners in Mexico and the United States. And this example actually predicts the distribution of species as they're expected to move north in the future. Again, collaborative, multi-partner foundation. And the third main principle is that our data sets are comprehensive, dynamic, and accessible. And our tools are based on data that are constantly being updated from daily to annually. And the dynamic nature of these data then permits their use for, number one, report cards, helping agencies and organizations and partners determine how their management actions are affecting bird populations of interest. It helps us to understand and detect changes in trends and temporal effects, and also changes in space over time. I'm going to share with you just a couple of other tools, and these node data visualization tools are really powerful ways to get quick summaries and information about the monitoring data. And at present, this is also one of the best ways to shop for data sets. And again, I want to emphasize that these data are dynamic. Results today may differ from results tomorrow as new data and data sets are being added. So in these screenshots here quickly, this first screenshot, these are some hypothetical examples from the Midwest in the Midwest Avian Data Center. So in this first example, you have the Midwest partners wanted to know the abundance of a species at any particular location in the Midwest. So I'm showing in this screenshot every detection of a cerulean warbler from all of the data sets that I've selected, and I realize that the print is kind of small. You can also drill in, and so you can click on one location where a cerulean warbler has been detected, and you can get a checklist of all birds detected at that point from all years and all data sets that are appropriate. You can also explore bird occurrences for any areas of interest, and we have several shape files already uploaded. Many of these are protected areas. You can query by state, by county. We've got important bird areas uploaded. We also have the wind energy potential layers, and so you can go in and explore bird communities and bird populations using these different spatial layers. In this example, I created a checklist for the county that I live in, hence the smiley face. We also wanted to allow people to download simple summaries of the data and to have some basic visualizations, whether those are trends or abundance or just simple diversity tables. So I can draw a polygon in this example, around a breeding bird survey route and get the following summary. What's really exciting is you can also go in and click on a stop, one particular stop within the breeding bird survey route, and get additional information about bird occurrence there. And you can also get some basic analytical outputs around those data for that stop. And I want to spend another minute or so on this histogram tool. This is similar to what you would find in a printed field guide. It shows the temporal distribution of species over the course of a year. And with this tool, which is available on almost all of the nodes, you can filter by species, by state, by county. And in this example, I just generated histograms for all species that were located throughout the entire upper Midwest region. But you can go in and right now you can search by National Wildlife Refuge, since funding for this update came from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Or you can go in and submit your own custom polygon and generate a histogram back for that area of interest. And here's just a screenshot to show you those different options. I'll come back to this tool in one of my examples to follow. In the future, we're also exploring options for connecting or sharing data from the AKN with other data clearinghouses, such as the Bison system that's being supported by USGS or data.gov. Those are just some examples of where we're trying to connect to and open up. One more point on our data principles, and that is that we offer several levels of data access and visibility. The first three levels that you see here are really internal to node operations, and this is where you can go in and either make the necessary edits and have your data reviewed by the project leader, or if you have some reason for those data to remain restricted or private. Let's say you have data from private land, or you have sensitive species locations you don't want to reveal. You have the means to protect those when you're going in and entering the data. And then we also have all of these data sharing levels that relate to how widely we publish your data. And again, this harkens back to our commitment to quality and transparency. This also gives data owners control over who accesses their data, for what purpose, and to ensure that they receive proper acknowledgement for the work that they've done to collect those data. And most of the data in the Avian Knowledge Network are available at level 3 and up. It's fewer and fewer that data sets are staying in there at a more restricted level. Okay, so I want to spend just the last few minutes of my presentation here today sharing with you a few examples of how the Avian Knowledge Network is already supporting bird smart decisions, especially as they relate to renewable energy development. So this first example comes from the Great Lakes Commission, or comes rather from the Midwest region. So the Great Lakes Commission is a compact of 2 Canadian provinces and 8 U.S. states that help manage energy developments around the Great Lakes as one of their many missions. And they have developed a wind atlas tool for that purpose. And through a recent partnership with the Midwest Avian Data Center, we are providing visualizations of bird occurrence. Remember those histograms that I showed you a few minutes ago. Bird occurrence throughout the year, as well as helping to manage bird occurrence data for several relevant projects. So they've subcontracted with several state and NGO communities here in the Midwest region to actually go out and collect up-to-date survey data. And so we're not only sharing with them the data that we're helping them manage, but we're also making available data from all of the data collections that are set to the appropriate sharing level. And so what's really neat about this project is that we're delivering these histograms or these visualizations entirely through the Wind Atlas tool, so that any user that visits the Great Lakes Wind Atlas tool can have the same experience throughout. So they're going in through the Great Lakes Wind Atlas and submitting their queries and are receiving the results directly through that page, even though the data and the visualizations are really being provided by the node. And what I want to mention here is that the funding for this project came from both a grant that the Commission received from the Great Lakes Fish and Wildlife Restoration Act, and also the Fish and Wildlife Service Regional Migratory Bird Program that I work for. The other example I want to share with you here, these really relate to both regulatory compliance, thinking about NEPA and the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the Eagle Act and Endangered Species Act, and then also impact assessment for projects and project planning. So the Avian Knowledge Network is a real natural fit for projects that are seeking to manage landscape-level resources, such as wind or solar siting projects, or that could be impacting landscape-level species like the golden eagle, and that's where this first example is going to come from. So as many of you may know, the golden eagle is a priority species for monitoring because of recent concerns about the impacts of some of these developments on the species. And this species is really best monitored through partnerships that span its entire distribution and its entire annual cycle. And the Avian Knowledge Network, because of how we're structured, how we work in partnership through a distributed network, is well suited to help maintain these partnerships and then also provide the data and visualizations. And we're currently working with the Ecological Services Division of the Fish and Wildlife Service to provide them with data that have been curated by the AKN for western populations of golden eagles to help with, again, their impact assessments and planning. Then the second example is again going back to the Sonoran Joint Venture region, and this planning tool gives another application where AKN data were used to identify areas for energy development in the Southwest that minimize impacts on avian diversity. So if you're trying to interpret this graphic, areas that are of higher bird conservation priority are highlighted in yellow-green, and the colder colors are areas of lower bird conservation priority. So again, it can facilitate impact assessment, planning, and siting based on well-maintained, well-described bird monitoring or research data sets. So a couple of closing remarks here, and the first is that again, the mission of the Avian Knowledge Network really is, informed bird conservation decisions. And our foundation is based entirely on partnerships. And the beauty of working in partnerships is that, one, they help us find conservation solutions because we're bringing together data, skills, and the ability to outreach results and reach audiences. They also help us add scrutiny and transparency to our work. And because we work in partnerships, we've seen, great financial stability throughout the Avian Knowledge Network. It also adds importance and justification to the individual partners that are working as part of the Avian Knowledge Network. Now, this screenshot is only a small fraction of the many institutions that work across the Avian Knowledge Network, but I wanted to give you an example and take a moment to recognize them. A more comprehensive list of our partners can be found at the Avian Knowledge Network's website. And I often get asked this question, so I wanted to throw in a slide that just talks about our sustainability model. And I won't read this verbatim, but I'll emphasize the following points. Primarily, the Avian Knowledge Network is funded by a partner commitment through NGO or nonprofit organization fundraising and projects. Secondly, government contracts and other similar projects provide funds that enhance or improve tools and data. And then we also develop cooperative agreements with key partners that help cover annual services and support. I have to recognize the generous contributions of data and information that are collected by both private and public organizations, as these also help support the Avian Knowledge Network. In addition, the Board of Directors at Point Blue Conservation Science, who maintains the California Avian Data Center and a lot of the technology that's being used throughout the Avian Knowledge Network, they have made a commitment to funding that infrastructure indefinitely. And so with that, I think I'm coming in just under 25 minutes here. I'd like to then open open the phone up for discussion about how the Avian Knowledge Network can specifically help the NWCC, American Wind Wildlife Institute, and everyone else here that's on the phone. So I think I'll turn it back over to Ian and Lauren now to help facilitate a brief Q&A period. And I just want to thank you again. This is a very broad overview of the Avian Knowledge Network, and I'm happy to distribute my contact information or field any questions or discussion that are generated after today's call.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie. As a reminder, if you have questions or ideas or feedback or anything like that, please send it along to us through the Q&A pod that's in the bottom right-hand corner of your webinar screen. There's a box there where you can type in your questions and send it over to us. We've had a couple come in so far, so I will start with those. Our first question, I think, maybe goes back to slide 12. And let me see if I can just pull that up, and we'll double check here. Let's see if this is it. So the question, Katie, is can you please expand on the map shown titled Conservation Priority Map? And I'm thinking maybe it's the one here on the bottom left. How is this developed? What are the inputs and assumptions? Is the GIS available for download?
Okay, I'm not the best person to ask about the details of this. So the Avian Knowledge Northwest node is supported primarily by Klamath Bird Observatory. And I believe if you go to their web page, you can receive metadata or instructions about the different conservation and decision support tools that they're serving up. And we can do one of two things. You could either visit that website and find the point of contact, or I can make my email address available. You can follow up with me specifically, and I can help track down. I can help put you in contact with the best person to answer that question. So I don't know exactly what you can get from that site, but I do know the best person for you to talk to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't give any greater detail.
No worries. Thanks so much. And if you're okay, we can put your email on the website with the webinar recording so that folks can reach out to you if they have follow-up questions.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. The next question is asking if the data capture and entry protocols include automated detection such as avian radars, acoustic monitoring devices, etc., with a note that some of those devices do not identify a species.
Right. To my knowledge, I don't believe we are managing data from autonomous recording or radar yet, but I can double check on that. What I can do is, if I could get the contact information, or Lauren, you can message me privately who's asking that question, I can track down where we're at on that and then email that individual back, in greater detail. But I don't believe we've been managing those data yet, but I will double check on that. I know we've had some early discussions about it, and certainly we're looking in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sounds good. Okay. The next question is asking how you or the network handles incomplete taxonomic identification, such as bird identified only to family. Do you use a taxonomic coding system such as ITIS?
That's a great question. I do know we use ITIS, and I know that in some cases it's protocol dependent. So the protocol can specify, how far down in classification you need to get when you enter a species. Some of them, if you're out counting shorebirds, you can submit the genus if you're not sure. In some instances I've seen protocols that allow you to do, unknown sparrow. So it's really protocol dependent, and that's all specified when you go in and describe the metadata around a monitoring program or around a data set. So we have the ability to account for that kind of variability within protocols or that kind of uncertainty in observations. And again, it's all linked and updated with ITIS.
Great, thank you. All right, the last question we have so far is asking about how or if the Avian Knowledge Network is being used in the creation of the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan.
Honestly, I don't know the degree to which it's being used, but I would be happy to learn more about that and contact some of my colleagues that work further west than I do to see if in fact it is.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. If you've got any questions that come up, please feel free to send them over. Not seeing any more right now, so we can go ahead on to the next presentation, and then if any other questions come up, we can come back to them afterwards. So Katie, thank you again. We really appreciate you presenting today. And I guess turn it over to Ian to introduce our next presenters while I pull up the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. And yeah, once again, thank you very much, Katie. It was a great presentation. So turning to our second presentation of the day, we'll be hearing a group presentation from Cara Lee, Tim Howard, and Matt Schlesinger. Cara Lee is a senior conservation project manager at the Nature Conservancy, where she works to promote landscape connectivity and responsible renewable energy development in the state of New York. And Tim Howard and Matt Schlesinger are the Director of Science and the Chief Zoologist, respectively, for the New York Natural Heritage Program. And the program's mission is to preserve biodiversity by providing scientific information and expertise to resource managers and other conservation partners. And with that, I believe, Cara, you were going to start off, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, and good afternoon. Thank you to everyone for joining us today for this webinar on new tools for balancing wind siting and biodiversity conservation in New York. I want to mention that in addition to Tim Howard and Matt Schlesinger, another member of our team is on the line with us, Greg Lampman from NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and that entity provided the funding to support this project, so he's on the line with us as well. Another thank you to the NWCC and the AWWI for hosting the presentation. Today's webinar caps off for us a series of presentations we've been making to wind industry representatives in New York, decision makers, and a variety of other partners over the last few months. With that, I'm going to just run through what we plan to cover today. This is our agenda. We want to give you a little overview of why we undertook this project. We'll walk you through our new online mapping site and discuss how the data that we have presented can be used, either using data layers to overlay with a wind turbine suitability map with biodiversity data, or we're also going to talk about a return on investment analysis that we've developed. And finally, we'll be talking about the application of the tool and its implications. So in terms of setting the stage for why we undertook this project, in a nutshell, we know that the use of renewable energy sources is going to be vital in terms of providing for our future energy needs and also mitigating climate change and its effects on biodiversity. Renewable energy resources, including wind power, are going to be a really important part in New York of meeting our goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050, which is the state's goal. At the same time that we want to see the development of renewable energy as a means of reducing carbon emissions, we're also really committed to understanding, avoiding, and mitigating the impacts of energy development on biodiversity. And we recognize that reducing these impacts can be accomplished by planning at a landscape scale in order to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts on important biodiversity resources. So getting to this slide, given the issues of impacts on biodiversity and our desire to see wind energy development move forward, we designed this project to inform siting policy that balances environmental impacts and wind energy project viability. And the project was designed with a variety of target audiences in mind, including developers, regulators, our NGO partners, and the public. So our goal revolved around the fact that in New York we didn't really have a comprehensive integrated set of biodiversity maps that could be used as a tool to help guide siting at a landscape scale. So our goal was to build a robust online set of information tools that could help both developers and regulators balance biodiversity and renewable energy development in New York. And to do that, we used core data sets and models that related to direct impacts on biodiversity, indirect impacts, and wind development and infrastructure.
Sorry, we're hearing some feedback. If anyone's on the phone, please make sure you mute your computer.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Sorry about that. I'm not sure where that came from.
All right. We'll see if it's gone. In addition, we use data synthesis methods that could be applied to these core data sets at a landscape scale. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Howard to talk about that process and the tool.
Hi, everybody. This is actually Matt Schlesinger with the Natural Heritage Program in New York. That's all right, Cara. And let me know if you're hearing. It seems like when we unmuted a minute ago is when maybe the feedback started. So let me know if you're getting that now.
So far, it seems okay.
Okay. Our computer is muted, so I'm not sure what that was, but
I think we may see.
Suddenly, maybe we'll try moving the computer farther away from the phone. I'm not sure why it would do this.
Yeah, I'm not getting it from you, so hopefully we'll be okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. Thanks.
All right, sure. So, Cara gave you the brief introduction to our project, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of layers, data layers we included in our online mapping tool, and then I'll turn it over to Tim to talk about some data synthesis methods, and then he'll return it to Cara for some closing remarks. Early on in the project, we built a sort of conceptual model that tried to show that we have a set of biodiversity priorities, bird and bat movement and migration, factors influencing particularly bat mortality at turbines, distributions of rare species, and also sort of landscape questions like large forest areas and connectivity. And then certain aspects of wind development we wanted to include as well, wind speed and power, infrastructure. And so those merge into sets of biodiversity priorities and wind priorities, which leads to this online mapping tool that can help with decision-making support. So I don't need to tell this group really that there are many other mapping tools out there, and I think what we hope distinguishes this tool is finer scale data that were available for New York State and some specific data sets that we thought would be really valuable to include for New York. And so I'm going to give you some overviews of those data sets. There are 20-odd layers, maybe more on the mapping tool, and I can only present just a few. So I'll present a few with some bullets of additional layers that are available. I move my cursor here. So our mapping site is at ebd.mapny.info, and that's energybydesign.mapny.info. That's Energy by Design is a Nature Conservancy program, so we've registered that domain name and tagged it with EBD. There's it's similar to a lot of other mapping tools I think that you've seen. There's the table of contents on the left with all the different data layers. You can set transparencies for these different layers, and some of them have sliding scale, so you can see different ranges of information given for each data layer. There are a number of different base maps that are possible. You can create PDFs there. There are also links to short descriptions of each layer and also more extensive descriptions in a PDF, metadata PDF that's available for each layer, sometimes linking to large reports that went into the generation of the data, as in the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's contribution, which I'll talk briefly about in a minute. So some of the biodiversity information we included, this is modeled rare species, and they're modeled rare species because we know that biodiversity information is incomplete for the state of New York, and I would argue probably everywhere. And So rather than just depict known locations of rare species, we built distribution models for about 350 rare plants and animals in New York, mapping environmental conditions that are similar to those at known locations through a complex computer algorithm called random forest. And once we had those individual species distribution maps, we stacked them up in a variety of ways. We didn't want the mapping tool to have much that focused on individual species because that could get overwhelming very fast. And so we stacked those layers to show maps of, in this example, all rare animals that we modeled, up to 17 whose potential habitat overlapped in any given place. And we did that for rare plants. We have a stack of listed species, state-listed and federally listed species. We also built some models of bat distributions using an independent data set from acoustic surveys over the last couple of summers, or actually summers of 2012 and 13. And modeled the travel zones of bats from hibernacula to roosting locations, and that's for the federally listed Indiana bat that we did that one. So that's one of the few examples of individual species layers that we included because of the high level of concern for bats and federally listed ones at that. If I had realized earlier that Avian Knowledge Network would be leading off this webinar, I might have focused a bit more on the migratory bird stopovers part of this biodiversity data set, because we worked with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to tap into the Avian Knowledge Network, and particularly eBird data, to build species-specific maps of migration season distribution in both spring and fall for 28 songbirds that have been identified as of concern with wind development, particularly collisions. So they used eBird data to model the distribution of these species using what they call a spatiotemporal exploratory model, or STEM. And then we had those individual species models and stacked those up as well to show the likely hotspots for migration in spring and fall for those 28 birds. In addition to terrestrial biodiversity, we have information on stream quality because as we try to make the point that the footprint of wind energy development and other energy development can be as important as direct impacts from collisions. And so in addressing this footprint, we wanted to include aquatic biodiversity as well, even though it's less likely that developments would sit right on top of wetlands or streams. There's certainly impacts to those. So this is an example of the indicator of water quality, the richness of Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, and Trichoptera. That's not in that order, mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. And it's an indicator of both water quality and aquatic biodiversity. We also have maps of the richness of freshwater mussels. These were brought in from a different project we did, from an earlier project from a couple years before. We built a freshwater blueprint for the state of New York, and we brought in a lot of those data layers into this mapping tool. We mapped the highest quality floodplains throughout New York State and resilient streams based on the length of the connected network of streams that's unbroken by dams or other diversions. Also some more landscapey and less species-specific kinds of layers. This is terrestrial connectivity and resilience from the Nature Conservancy's Eastern Resource Office or Eastern Science Center. These are a variety of data layers that they built to show the resilience of landscapes based on their landforms and elevations and diversity of different kinds of landforms throughout the Northeast, which we clipped to New York. We also mapped the matrix forest blocks, that's a Nature Conservancy conservation target, and created a model of potential linkages between those blocks for forest animals that might need to travel among them. And then also quickly, we have some energy development information. So here's a map of existing and proposed wind turbines from the FAA, and then some other factors that might go into energy siting, including elevation, distance to power transmission. This is wind power class. I'm sure you're familiar with these maps. We also included shale depth and thickness, so 2 different kinds of shale, with the eye towards this mapping tool being useful for other energy development issues. And I think with this one, I turn it over to Tim to talk about how we might synthesize this wide variety of data layers that we brought together in one place.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you everyone for being on. So what do we do with all these layers? We can use them as they are. You can log on to that online mapping tool at ebd.mapny.info and view them. Turn them on and off, overlay them, change their transparency and see through them and things like that, and get a better picture of how they might integrate and what different places in New York look like. But also we can gather them together and look at and compile the information in different ways. And so this is the modeling and synthesis component of the project, we're really building the approach and the methodology and not necessarily placing these on the tool. So we can model things within a focal group. For example, just considering known wind turbine locations, where might there be other very good turbine locations in the landscape. As well, and you can do the same thing with from the perspective of conservation priority, where are the conservation hotspots in the state. But we're really interested in integrating interests across focal groups, and so I'll describe briefly our return on investment approach for wind development within the context of conservation, or vice versa, biodiversity conservation within the context of wind development. So here's our output from the turbine distribution model, and this is different than just the wind power class map. Of course, turbines are placed at higher wind power class zones, but there's a lot more that plays into it. And so we intersected known turbine locations from that FAA data set with things like elevation, as well as the wind power, as well as distance from transmission lines, as well as agricultural forested lands. And this gave us a better picture of really the best environments based on current known locations, the best environments for future turbine development. But if we wanted to integrate that with, well, what about the best locations for putting additional wind turbines within the context of wanting also to consider biodiversity conservation priorities. And we can put that in the context of this return on investment approach by defining, say, from the development of wind development, perspective of wind development, our return being those locations most similar to existing turbine sites, that high priority turbine development sites. That's our return. But including 2 other components, one being the probability of success, the likelihood that construction will be successful at that site, as well as a cost term and costs in developing and maintaining the site. And that cost term could be relative to actual costs or relative to some other nebulous kind of cost idea. And I'll bring in the example of how we applied that here. So as I mentioned, for that return value, we use that turbine distribution model. And so we say these are those darker orange sites are those that are the best sites would give us the highest return for wind development. But that cost term, there's certainly at every spot you have considerations such as environmental regulation, additional screening that you might have to deal with, additional mitigation that you might have to deal with. And we had some layers that could feed into that. And so we pulled out just a few of the data sets that we've shared on the website, one of them being state-listed species. So if there's high potential for state-listed species at a potential development site, there may be additional mitigation and or survey costs or permitting costs involved with building at these sites. Same thing with federally listed species. So here are these Indiana bat hibernacula and summer roosting areas with potential travel zones or corridors between those locations. So there may be additional mitigation and or permitting and or survey costs associated with these zones where we have federally listed species. Similarly with aquatic costs crossing streams, and there may be other mitigation costs working within areas that are close to streams or close to wetlands associated with streams. So we added this in as well. And there may be increased costs working in more heavily forested areas. So you can add that piece. And applying all those to our cost terms, so we can join all those 4 different layers together and provide and use that as an overall sort of cost surface that we can then apply to things. But what do we use about the probability of success? Well, one approach would be to think about a protected lands layer where we have state parks and state forests and other things that can feed into the model. And so the highest protection, the state wilderness areas such as parts of the Adirondack Park and parts of the Catskills and other places have the highest protection, and it would be hardest to move forward with the development there, and so that would have the lowest probability of success. But the vast majority of the state, the white in this area, would have there's no known protection, and so we could consider that 100% probability of success, considering just this component. So moving along very, very quickly, I can apply that ROI formula using those surfaces, the potential wind development turbine distribution map, as well at times the probability of success map, divided by potential costs integrated as our biodiversity surface, and I end up with basically a restriction on, or a slight contraction of the depiction of that turbine distribution model. So given all the ideal sites in that orange, the blue on the right is a slight contraction of that and shows ideal sites for developing wind turbines within the context of biodiversity conservation. So I think on the next slide what I'll do is I'll show you a zoom in to just part of the state that has the orange and as well as an overlay with the ROI model on it. So on the left panel is the zoom in to just part of the state with that return on investment model, and those remain as high priority sites for wind development within the context of biodiversity conservation. And on the right, it just shows you that's the blue overlying all the potential turbine priority sites. And you notice that some places there was some of the orange has some conflict with biodiversity, and so you end up with a slightly less total area, but still plenty of area to do your work in. So what I did a very quick overview of one approach for synthesizing the vast array of information that we have, and we've developed these data layers. We've developed ways to synthesize that information. We put a whole suite of the data layers online, and we've got a final report that's coming out very shortly, and other information that can help you and your colleagues think about synthesizing this information in those contexts. So I think with that, I will pass it back over to Cara in our last couple of minutes to talk very briefly about how this might apply to this new screening tool coming up.
Thank you, Tim. I think I just want to put this tool that you've just seen in the context of the Fish and Wildlife Service voluntary wind energy guidelines, which probably most people are familiar with, those guidelines were developed by the Fish and Wildlife Service in response to the rapid expansion of the wind industry, wind energy industry, and the intention was to help shape smart siting, design, and operations. So those guidelines provide a structured process for addressing wildlife conservation and wind energy development using a tiered approach for assessing potential impacts. And this just briefly describes the tiers that they're kind of an iterative process for evaluating wildlife impacts in the context of wind energy development. And I guess I would just point out that the project we've been working on is really useful in terms of Tier 1 and Tier 2, which are earlier parts of the process, the early phases of project development, because they are at a landscape scale. It's a broad characterization of sites, whereas when you get to Tier 3, you're getting into field studies to really document wildlife and habitat on the site and predict impacts. So while Matt pointed out that this has finer scale data than many other wind mapping tools, it's still intended for that preliminary evaluation at a landscape scale. I think we're going to close by talking a little bit about our Project Advisory Committee. We wanted to kind of introduce you to who was on our committee. And as you can see, it represents diverse interests drawn from industry, the regulatory community, and the conservation or NGO community. We worked closely over the time we were developing the tool with this Project Advisory Committee and consulted through a series of phone conferences and webinars, and we were really pleased because we had great participation from the members of the committee, and the committee ended up playing a really important role in terms of helping shape the tool and helping us think through its design and implications. So we have a debt of gratitude to the parties that participated in this project as members of our Project Advisory Committee. So with that, I think we've finished our presentation, and we'd now be happy to answer some of the questions that may have come in. And so I'll turn it back over to Ian and Lauren to help us respond to those questions.
All right, thank you so much for the presentation. As a reminder, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and send them our way, and we will read them out loud. Looks like we've got one that's come in so far. And this question is asking if there are any effect descriptions, dose-effect relations in the data layer system in order to evaluate potential effects of siting wind turbines or wind farms.
Could you just repeat that briefly? I'm sorry.
Asking if there's any... Uh-oh. You can mute again while I re-ask it. All right, I think that stopped. I think it's looking at whether there's any parts of the tool that can help you look at potential effects of siting wind farms. So effect descriptions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We intentionally added a whole. I mean, I think the whole suite of biodiversity information could gives you information about the types of things you might encounter at a potential site if you are thinking about if you have potential sites in the landscape. And so it's really a landscape level tool that as Cara mentioned, is ideal for contextualizing which landscapes might be more appropriate for potential development as opposed to others. We didn't include any of the ROI analysis or for example that wind turbine suitability surface on the online tool. So those are really just protocols or methods that we developed that anyone could apply. Anyone with GIS person or GIS experience could apply. But I think the online tool gives you that a kind of perspective where you can overlay things and say, oh yeah, there's potential for issues here, and maybe fewer potential for issues there. Does that answer the question?
I think that's the person who asked the question. Any follow-up? All right. Well, hopefully that addressed the question. Not seeing any other questions coming in right now. I'll wait another bit and see if anything else comes in. And as a reminder, if you have any questions on the first presentation as well, we're happy to go back to those. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions. You guys must have covered everything really well. Oh, wait, here we go. Here's a question about whether you have any examples of when developers using the tool for looking at potential sites.
Excellent question, and no, because it's young. It's very, very young, and so we've pretty much just rolled this information out, and the tool has been rolled out in the last 6 months or so, and so we've made a big push in the spring and summer to get the message out to a whole variety of potential users. And so we haven't had feedback yet on any use, but we hope that the information continues to get out there and people have the potential to use it. And I think a suite of partners could be the tool could be useful to a suite of partners. One of those being wind development. And actually, the feedback we've gotten so far is that this is really the only place where you can get this kind of biodiversity or conservation-related information online, and so it might be very useful for some of those initial screenings.
Great, thank you. We've had a question come in from the previous presentation. Katie, are you still with us?
I am.
All right, I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint. It's asking about a specific slide. Okay. And there's one that mentioned the NTLCC tool.
Yes.
And another tool. And if you could just share a little bit more about what those are.
Sure. I'm going to try to navigate there quickly here. Excuse me. Okay. So a little bit more about what they are. I'll do my best because those, again, both of these. So my geography is the Upper Midwest region, but I work in collaboration with folks across the Avian Knowledge Network. And the beauty is actually these are both web applications. So if you wanted to go and learn everything about these sites, and I know that they include all the assumptions inherent in the tools, the types of data sets, and they deliver map products, you can visit these sites. So the North Pacific LCC tool, you can actually type in Pacific Northwest climate change, avian vulnerability, and you'll be able to navigate directly to that. That's being served up by Point Blue Conservation Science. And again, this project pulled together data from 99 different projects with 47 different protocols, over 1 million records, and they actually aggregated these with 2 million existing records, and they were able to publish predicted bird distributions that were corrected for imperfect detection. And I emphasize that because I think that this is one of the first published studies to do this. I believe they're publishing this very soon if they haven't already. If you want additional details on this project, you would be so much better served by visiting the website than asking me for information. And similarly with the Sonoran Joint Venture tool here, again, you can look up Sonoran Joint Venture Climate Change Impacts tool. I could pull that up right now and try and share it with all of you, but again, that's where you can go in and it gives you information about the mapping tool. You can explore by species, you can explore by habitat, you can vary which climate model you use, and I think there are some other features in there that you can explore and interact with, and again, they provide very good metadata about the assumptions or about the sources of data for that decision support tool. And please feel free to follow up right now if I didn't accurately answer your question.
Thank you. And a follow-up question, which not sure if you'll be able to answer, but we can try. And it's asking if the predicted climate change effects models are applicable for other applications such as wind development.
They certainly could be because I think they have models predicting current distribution, right, and then also future distribution. So I think if you properly cite the tool and read through the assumptions inherent in the tool, you can then make the decision on whether it's giving you the best information. I would also recommend that if you're planning to explore and use these tools for citing projects, nowadays, feel free to follow up with the points of contact for these tools too. They may be able to provide you additional information, or there may be some additional analyses or visualizations or outputs that could be built into these tools in the future that better address the needs that you're working with. So certainly consider this a starting point for future collaboration.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, and another question has come in for the second presentation on the biodiversity tool. And this is asking if the model has been validated using impact assessments in post-construction reports at existing wind facilities.
We have a heck of a lot of models in there, and so I'm not sure. Oh, let's see. So the species distribution models have been validated in the sense that we can leave out some known locations, run the model, and ask the model, can you predict those locations that you didn't know about? And we actually, of the whole suite of 350 or so species distribution models, some of them didn't pass, some of them failed. And we removed those when we were testing the models. We removed the ones that failed from the suite of models that we ended up creating. And so we did have a validation process for that. We had a very similar validation process for the wind turbine distribution model, in the sense that we asked whether or not the model algorithm could predict locations that we told it that didn't exist. And so there's a relatively rigorous validation procedure. We did not have field surveys crews go out afterwards to evaluate whether or not these models did well or not. So I think that's pretty much the way the validation worked.
And I think it'll be interesting to see as developers and contractors do pre-construction surveys. We really hope that they might share their data so we can compare the predictions of the model to field data. But as Tim said earlier, the model is, or the set of models and the online mapping tool are new, so it's a bit too soon to expect field validated or field validation of any of the models that went into it yet. But I hope that we'd be able to get that in the future.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. Just see, oh, here comes one. All right, so this is a question for Katie about the Avian Knowledge Network. And it's asking if the Avian Knowledge Network includes data about avian abundance for offshore sites.
Yeah, great question. We are starting to bring in more of those types of data sets. For example, in the Great Lakes, part of that project I shared with you focused on surveying birds from airplanes in the offshore and open waters of the Great Lakes. And so we're managing and maintaining and sharing data from aerial transect surveys. I know that off of the California coast, they conduct offshore surveys for birds, and they're managing data. And actually, you can go to the California Avian Data Center and I believe start to explore some of those data sets. We're also entering into conversations with, we've had interest expressed from partners off the Atlantic coast who are managing or beginning to manage or collect offshore data, and are very interested in working with the Avian Knowledge Network not only to help manage those data, but again deliver those data in formats that support the types of development decisions that are being made offshore. So the answer is yes. We do have some data sets already, and I expect that in the next 2 years we'll have even more. If you're managing or collecting data of this nature, feel free to contact me, and I can route you to the appropriate AKN contact to talk more about that.
Great, thank you. Just seeing if any other questions pop up, but I think we can probably wrap up early. Just want to make a quick plug for our upcoming NWCC Wind Wildlife Research Meeting, and that will take place the first week of December, December 2nd through 5th, and hope everyone is aware of that. And registration is open for the meeting. You can find the meeting site on the main NWCC page. We also have a draft agenda up. There'll be a number of presentations and panels happening at the meeting, probably about 60 posters as well, presenting on the latest wind wildlife research that's been conducted over the last 2 years since the previous meeting took place. So hope all of you will be able to attend, and if you have any questions about the meeting, feel free to reach out to Ian or I, and we will get back to you. So with that, I want to thank our presenters again. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and present on your tools. And we will put the recording up on the NWCC website and PDFs of the presentation so folks can refer back. And thank you all for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Lauren and Ian.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye, everyone.